Welcome to the 26th Annual Spirit and Place Festival. My name is Erin Kelly, and I'm the Program Director for Spirit and Place, which is proudly part of the IU School of Liberal Arts at IUPUI. From November 4 through 14, we invite you to explore the theme of change through an amazing array of events this community, once again, has stepped up to create. 95% of the festival is created by the community. Spirit and Place is only directly responsible for the opening night and closing public conversation. Otherwise, we are a platform for artists, scholars, congregations, and others to strengthen community by tackling a yearly theme using the arts, humanities, and religion. Spirit and Place, which is self-funded, would not be able to do this work without the generous support of volunteers, partner organizations, and donors, including Lilly Endowment, the IU School of Liberal Arts at IUPUI, Allen Whithill Clues Charitable Foundation, Bolson Group, the Indianapolis Foundation, a CICF affiliate, Nicholas H. Noyes Jr. Memorial Foundation, St. Paul's Episcopal Church, and more than 200 other individual donors. Thank you. Now, as you enjoy the festival, we do have a few tips. First, check out our new website at spiritandplace.org. This is where you can explore and register for events, which are a mixture of virtual, hybrid, and in-person offerings. At in-person events, we ask that you please wear a mask, maintain social distancing, and stay at home if you feel unwell. Remember, this is a community festival, so let's take care of each other. That means not only taking COVID precautions, but also using Spirit and Place's community agreements, which are found on our website and in the event guide. We use these agreements to create the energy needed to make the most out of the festival. And after an event, either complete a paper evaluation or visit spiritandplace.org to fill out an online survey. We genuinely use this feedback to guide our work. And if you feel so inclined, consider supporting Spirit and Place through a financial contribution. We are 100% funded by the community and cannot do this work without your support. Thank you and enjoy the festival.
Welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Manon Voice and I am so happy to be back for a second time emceeing the Spirit and Place Festival's opening night kickoff. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that no matter where you are joining us, we are all standing on traditional homelands once belonging to Indigenous people who were unjustly and violently removed from the land. Spirit and Place's home is in central Indiana. We acknowledge and honor the Miami, Potawatomi, Shawnee, and others who cared for this land long before our arrival and continue to do so. As members of the IUPUI community, Spirit and Place also acknowledges the displacement of a vibrant Black community due to campus development. They honor those affected by systemic racism and injustice by centering them in their work. For the next hour, we hope you will just sit back, relax, and learn about the events and this year's festival. And as a special treat, we are also going to debut a brand new solo piano piece by jazz pianist Christopher Pitts, who we are going to meet with in just a few minutes. But to kick things off, I want to tell you about the Spirit and Place Award of Awesomeness. Since 2016, Spirit and Place has awarded a $1,000 prize to the festival event that best tackles the yearly theme, creatively uses the arts, humanities, or religion, and otherwise creates a truly awesome festival experience. Past award winners have included Ebenezer Baptist Church, Kepper Institute, Ivy Tech, Indiana Prison Writers Workshop, and the Hindu Temple of Central Indiana. This year, we have 4 nominees: Monarchs in a Changing World, How These Butterflies Bring Us Together, Monumental Changes, History and Power in Public Art, Truth-Giving, Using Food to Dismantle a Colonial Myth, and We Can Change the Past, Unearthing the History of Arab Indianapolis. Rather than me telling you about these events, I'm going to turn things over to the event creators to tell you all about their awesome work.
What's awesome about this event is that the audience will see the debut of a beautiful short film by professional documentarian Josh Chitwood. It's the intimate story of the search for his Syrian and Lebanese roots here in Indianapolis. Stories like Josh's reconnect us with a past that some of us have forgotten. These stories have the power to change our hearts. We can't change what happened, but when we think differently about the past, we can be transformed. We can imagine different possibilities. Arab people's contributions to Indianapolis's past have been largely forgotten, but with Josh's help, on a cold night in November, we will unearth that buried past. I hope you'll join us and leave inspired to tell that story, but also to discover your own story about the truly multicultural spirit of the place we call home.
Hello, I am here to discuss our Spirit in Place event, Monarchs in a Changing World. Why is our event awesome? Species decline and habitat loss pose massive and overwhelming challenges today. But Monarchs in a Changing World will bring personal agency to these large-scale environmental problems. The connection each participant makes to these issues through hands-on art, discussion, and reflection will make it more likely for them to take meaningful environmental action in the future.
Our exhibit and panel discussion, Monumental Changes, History and Power in Public Art, represents the Garfield Park Art Center's hope for an earnest conversation and co-building more equitable green spaces and public art with our communities. The 2020 Confederate monument removal in Garfield Park was a physical change in our historic park that left the community with mixed feelings. We felt it was our duty to educate and create dialogue around the change, especially as Indy Parks begins to confront its controversial history and undergo racial equity efforts to better serve our multicultural communities. This topic is hyper-local to the Garfield Park neighborhood, but represents conversations that are happening on a national and international level as we all address racial inequities. This project is one of the first times we, as a city organization, are really able to dig deep into challenging material. The exhibit includes content from students at IU School of Liberal Arts Museum Studies program and Heron School of Art Design at IUPUI as part of their Public Art and Power course. We'll also lean on public art and history experts for a panel discussion. We hope to encourage guests to tackle how they understand and define public art and explore how history and memory are written and rewritten to reflect our past, present, and future. Together, we can create more collaborative and inclusive futures for public art in our green spaces.
My name is Kyra, and I'm the Public Programs Coordinator at the Idle-George Museum in Indianapolis. This year, we're organizing an exciting event titled Truthsgiving, Using Food to Dismantle a Colonial Myth. Since Spirit in Place takes place in November, which is Native American Heritage Month, and also the month when the Thanksgiving holiday is celebrated, we thought it was a great opportunity to address the false narrative of Thanksgiving. You know, a story where Pilgrims and Native Americans sat down and had this peaceful dinner together. Maybe you heard a different story, but why should the narrative change? And why does the real story matter? Well, we can't continue to tell inaccurate and romanticized histories that contribute to the erasure of Native peoples and their experiences. Understanding the true history of Thanksgiving is a small start to affirming the experiences and issues Native communities have and continue to face. Since food is at the center of all cultures, it's a powerful way to connect people. What better way to discuss a difficult topic than to invite Andy Murphy, a Navajo food journalist and host of Toasted Sisters podcast, to talk about food sovereignty and sustainability while doing a food demonstration. We also welcome Jonathan James Perry, who is an Aquinnah Wampanoag culture bearer, to talk about the real history of Thanksgiving and alternative ways to celebrate. This event, it's not about canceling the holiday. It's about changing a narrative. We hope to see you there. Thanks.
Wow. Don't those events genuinely sound awesome? Good luck to all the nominees. The Spirit in Place Festival fosters creativity and invites us to bring their whole selves to the table. Our artistic sides, our intellectual halves, and even our spiritual selves. Spirit in Place is truly unique in that it invites people of faith, whether affiliated with a congregation or not, and regardless of faith practice, to be a part of the festival and to express that which is deeply held in their souls. Two spiritually rooted events in this year's festival are Oracles of Change by Franklin College and Be Anxious for Nothing by Christ Church Cathedral, Indianapolis Hebrew Congregation, Progressive Baptist Church, and Mashhid El Muminin. We're going to start by learning more about Oracles of Change, interfaith understanding through art and poetry with Hannah Adams Ingram with Franklin College. Welcome, Hannah. It's so great to have you.
Hi, it's so good to be here.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. So I'm a poet and a practicing contemplative, and I admit I'm really eager to learn more about Oracles of Change. Hannah, can you tell us how this event came about and what the audience can expect?
Oh, I am so excited about this event. So we believe that interfaith dialogue and interfaith engagement is important to not only learning more about your own faith practice, but interacting with others out in the world, right? But at a college, even at a college, lectures don't always they don't have that spark. They're missing that human spark, and where we get that human spark is art and the humanities. And so, what this event does is brings two poets, Preeti Kaur Rajpal and Sadia Bashir, who are poets from two different religious traditions, Sikhism and Islam, to perform poetry and then discuss together how art transforms society. So, oracles of change being our artists point the way to something else. They tell us when something isn't right with society or give us a vision for where we could be. And so celebrating that tradition of poetry and learning about faiths of other people through not a lecture, but through art, through our common shared humanity. And so we are just jazzed to have this event in which we get to share this with the world.
Oh, thank you so much, Hannah. I love that approach and using poetry as a tool for interfaith dialogue and activism. I love all of that. Thank you so much. That sounds very, very powerful. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I hope that what people find when they join us for this event is the poetry, the inspiring poetry of other people, but then also a self-reflection about how art and spirituality comes together for all of us. We might not all be poets, but it might be other pieces of art that help us express who we are so that we can engage with each other in really meaningful ways.
Oh, thank you so much, Hannah. This is going to
Thank
be
you.
a great event. I just know it. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and good luck on November 11th. Let's now welcome Shannon Joyce from Christ Church Cathedral to the screen so that we can learn more about the event she and her partners are working on. Be Anxious for Nothing, Loss and Joy and Unexpected Change.
Hello, I'm
Hi,
excited to be
Shannon.
here.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's great to be with you. So your event is using sacred music and Abrahamic texts to explore how we hold space for grief and joy during times of unexpected change. And the pandemic and other world events have surely shaped this event. Can you tell us more about what the audience will take away?
Well, last year when the world shut down, we were in the midst of a Lenten conversation about Moses leading the Israelites through the desert, and we really connected with that feeling of not knowing what's coming next. And with God being an experiential teacher, and repeatedly we see stories about how he just really shakes things up to get our attention and to help us see things from a different perspective. And so as we kept moving through pandemic, we thought, well, and we listened to how divisive the community conversation had become, and we thought, well, we keep hearing echoes of the same stories of change in all of the different texts, and we need to bring that together. And so as we grappled with that individually, we thought, we need to talk about this. We need to work as a community because that's how we come together. And so our stories and our songs bring that added depth. They say to sing is to pray twice. And so it brings that added depth to the conversation, and making sure that we see that we have more in common than it often sounds like we do. And it's the best way to create community is with stories.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. The best way to create communities is through stories. And is this your first time working with the congregations that you are working with?
It is, and we reached out to partners that we felt like we had things in common with as far as different activities that we do, but also we are making new partnerships. There are groups that we have never worked with before, so we're hoping to extend and widen our embrace, as we say.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. That sounds so beautiful and very powerful, and a narrative that we all find ourselves in at this time. So thank you so much for offering this to the community and sharing information tonight about Be Anxious for Nothing, which happens this Monday, November 8th. So I can't wait to attend. So thank you so much, Shannon.
Thank you.
Another event that I'm looking forward to is the annual public conversation. The Spirit and Place Festival public conversation has been happening since 1996, where the inaugural speakers were Kurt Vonnegut, Dan Wakefield, and John Updike. The conversation has experimented with different formats over the years, but has always provided the community with thought-provoking insights. This year is no different, as Spirit and Place has invited Robert P. Jones, author of White Too Long, The Legacy of White Supremacy in American Christianity, to sit down in conversation with Dr. Leah Gunning Francis of Christian Theological Seminary. Spirit and Place director Pam Blevins Hinkle sat down earlier with Dr. Gunning Francis to talk about this year's public conversation.
Dr. Gunning Francis, thank you so much for joining me here today to sit down and talk about the upcoming public conversation, which you'll be moderating on November 14th at St. Paul's Episcopal Church. But before we dive into the public conversation, I do want to take a minute to celebrate your recent book that just came out called Faith After Ferguson, which follows an earlier book, correct?
Yes.
Called Ferguson and Faith. And so tell us a little bit about your work in Ferguson and what it is that you're learning.
So when the Ferguson uprising occurred in Ferguson, I was actually living there in the St. Louis area and was invited to write about clergy involvement in Ferguson. And so out of that came stories and interviews with clergy, young activists who not only were engaged in the movement on the streets, but were able to also talk about what this had to do with an expression of their faith. Like, this wasn't just something they were doing because they thought this was a good idea, which it is, but it also was integral to how they understood their life of faith and spirit. And so that book was very well received, and the publisher came back to me and said, oh, would you like to write a follow-up book? Because the world saw the tanks and the tear gas across the television and computer screens during the Ferguson uprising, but many people don't know, well, what's happened since then? And so I went back to Ferguson, re-interviewed some of the previous people from the first book, as well as invited in some new voices to find out what's happened since then. And what we found is it is truly a movement of resilience. The kind of change that people hope to see, many people hope to see, is not the kind of change that often happens overnight. And so it's the intentional, ongoing work that has made it possible for some incremental changes to happen, but the broader movement for racial justice still is an ongoing enterprise, as you know. And so it was really an honor to be able to talk with people, as well as pull the narrative from Ferguson all the way up through the US Capitol insurrection. Because as you know, so much has happened over these past 7 years as it relates to racial justice, and to be able to include many different kinds of stories to help get us thinking about what is the work that we all need to be doing right now to bring about true equality, liberty, and justice for all.
As you know, Spirit in Place has been on its own racial equity journey since 2015, and we have done and continue to do lots of inner work, and we've invited the community to join us in dialogue through a series that we have called Powerful Conversations on Race. And we invited Robert Jones to Indianapolis because we know from our own work that white supremacy is everywhere, including some spaces and places that are very hard for us to look at, such as inside our faith homes.
That is so true. And to be able to have a chance to sit down and to talk with Robert Jones about his book, White Too Long, where we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of what it means to untether Christianity from white supremacy. You know, a lot of times people hear that and grimace and say, well, that's not so. But as you know, in his book, he really lays out exactly how this came to be historically and helps us to think about what we need to do going forward, so that people of all faiths can understand that the shared values that we have of love, of justice, of empathy, of belonging is what needs to be in the foreground, and that just cannot coexist within a system of white supremacy.
Yes. And I'm so glad to hear you talk about all faiths, because at Spirit in Place, we're dedicated to serving people of all faith traditions. And this event, however, is rooted very solidly in Christianity. Can you talk a little bit about how you hope to make this event relevant to our friends who aren't Christian?
Yeah, I hope that our friends across the religious spectrum and those who identify as not having a religious tradition at all, first can see the argument that's being made about how the meta-narrative, if you will, about religion and white supremacy is so rooted in Christianity, but at the same time, it is not ineffective for various faith traditions, because even though they're not Christian per se, every community, every religious community can engage in doing the work of looking at their own systems, their own structures, their own ways of being and organizing, to kind of do their own audit and say, oh my, how is white supremacy showing up even within our religious tradition?
Wonderful. And what are some of the topics you hope to cover with Robert Jones in this?
So I hope we can bring up, what is it that we're asking people to do? In light of learning, okay, we learn the history, we know that the relationship between Christianity and white supremacy is rooted in our context. Okay, so what do we do about it? And the hope is to be able to have some real takeaways that the audience can see, oh wow, this is what undoing racism, confronting white supremacy in my context can look like.
Thank you, Dr. Gunning-Francis, for joining me here today and for your participation in this year's festival. We so appreciate it.
It is my pleasure, and I look forward to the event.
Thank you, Pam and Dr. Gunning-Francis. What you just saw was only half the interview. To watch the extended version and learn more, visit spiritandplace.org. I am grateful to Spirit in Place and its partners at St. Paul's Episcopal Church and the Center for the Study of Religion and American Culture and the IU School of Liberal Arts at IUPUI for making this year's public conversation happen. The Spirit and Place Festival can sometimes be a place where challenging dialogue happens and where we wrestle with the hard stuff. But it is also a space for beauty and for art. Let me tell you about a handful of art-based events taking place this year. Eternity 123 brings Buto dance to Indy. This avant-garde Japanese dance form is all about shifting and changing from the conscious to subconscious and is brought to us by the Indianapolis Movement Arts Collective and Big Car. And that's not the only dance performance going on. With Leave Them Something, the JCC, Indianapolis, Dance Kaleidoscope, Indiana Writers Center, and Kurt Vonnegut Museum and Library have teamed up to explore climate change through writing, dance, and music inspired by the artwork of Kurt Vonnegut's daughter, Edith. Maybe dance isn't your thing, but theater is. Head on down to the Fonseca Theater tomorrow night for a theatrical reading and discussion of Hoosier playwright Daphne White's play, Susan B. The play revolves around Susan B. Anthony's struggle between sexism, racism, and the 15th Amendment. You can also make a stop at the Phoenix Theater tomorrow to check out Tearing Down Walls and Embracing Change. This is a fabric art exhibit by the artists of Infiber and Acoma Natoso Modern Quilt Guild of Central Indiana. After viewing the exhibit, join a discussion on how art can be a vehicle for healing and growth. Another art-focused event I'd like to share with you is the Memory Keepers, and it's incredible. This event not only is striving to amplify voices, but preserve those voices in the complex legacy of the Twin Air neighborhood. Southeast Neighborhood Development, or SIN, Studio 201, and artist Kayla Austin and the Twin Air Neighborhood Coalition are hosting an exhibit and community conversation about their efforts to record, elevate, and archive the history of memory keepers who have called Twin Air home. To tell you more about this event and her connection to it is incredible artist and my friend Kayla Austin.
Hey, my name is Kayla Austin. I am an artist living on the near southeast side of town.
Ella es Kayla Austin y ella se mudó aquí a este vecindario este año en enero.
And moving back to this part of town, I grew up here as a child. Moving back here was a really difficult decision. I dealt with a lot of racism as a kid in this neighborhood.
Fue una decisión muy difícil para ella moverse a este vecindario de regreso porque en su niñez ella experimentó racismo.
And it was never in my intentions to come back.
Y nunca fue su intención regresar.
So we ended up here. I ended up here back in January, and I felt really isolated, and I felt, maybe like I had made a mistake, or maybe like I had betrayed myself in moving back.
Al regresar aquí en enero se sintió aislada y tal vez pensando que no era buena idea regresar.
And because it's difficult to grow in the same places that you were traumatized, right?
Porque es lo mismo, no es lo mismo crecer y regresar a un lugar donde fuiste traumatizada.
So, in my feelings of isolation, I've always leaned on the arts. So I started reaching out to my community and seeing if people would come to my studio space and sit for portraits and talk to me about their lives.
Y invité a mucha gente que conozco en esta comunidad a sentarse en mi estudio y a conversar con ellos y a saber un poco más de su historia en este vecindario mientras los pintaba.
And pretty soon after starting the project, I was put into contact with SIND and have been able to do the same work on a much larger scale?
Rápidamente fui conectada con Send y que me dio la oportunidad de hacer este proyecto mucho más grande de lo que yo ya había iniciado.
And the project really has given me the opportunity to get to know my community and what it means to be a resident of the near southeast side.
Y este proyecto me ha dado a mí la oportunidad de ver la historia de mi vecindario y hacerlo a lo grande.
And while this is a neighborhood that is deeply steeped in racism, there is much more to this place than meets the eye.
Mientras tanto, este proyecto me enseña lo que hacía hace muchos años era su historia. Ahora me deja ver que no es todo lo que se presenta, sino que hay mucho más que eso.
And all the people that I interviewed through this project are just grassroots community leaders.
Todas las personas que se han entrevistado en este proyecto son fundadores, líderes de esta comunidad.
These are people who saw a need or a void in their community and stepped forth to fill it.
Son personas que han visto la necesidad y se han parado al frente para ver cómo ayudan.
And I think for me, the most powerful part of working on this project, of meeting these people, of getting to know my community and their families, is that a single person can create such great change.
Lo que más me ha impactado de este proyecto es ver cómo una sola persona puede inspirar a toda una comunidad a cambios grandes.
And now, I am so thrilled to introduce my friend, the amazingly talented Christopher Pitts. Welcome, Christopher.
Hey, how you doing? Good to be here.
Thank you so much for coming. It
sure.
is great to see you, and we're so glad to have you this evening.
Definitely.
So we need to start things off by thanking the Indiana Arts Commission, which gets support from the state of Indiana and the National Endowment for the Arts. They helped bring you here tonight. And Spirit in Place was able to commission a new work from you through a grant program sponsored by the Arts Commission. So thank you, Indiana Arts Commission and Spirit in Place, for supporting local artists. That's so important. Last year, the same grant program allowed Spirit in Place to commission me to create a poem, A Brave Attempt, which tied to the 2020 Origins theme. And it was such an honor to do so. This year, you've obviously been asked to create something tied to change. So what is the piece called, and how did you approach this composition?
Yes, so the composition, I'm going to call it The Road. I'm honored, I just want to say that I'm honored to follow in your footsteps, one of my favorite artists in town,
Thank you.
to do this commission. But it's called The Road, and it focuses on the theme of change, as like you said.
Yeah.
And so I really approached this by thinking of comparing the static and the dynamic. So our human experience going through all these recent changes in life. So the first theme is introspection. The second theme is the anxiety and depression that we went through. And then there's a catharsis, and then the reconciliation. And the reconciliation is kind of dealing with the new normal, because we're not going back, we're always moving forward.
Yeah.
And so those themes kind of, that's how I kind of planned the composition. I also asked for a constraint, so there's like a time constraint, try to keep it in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But that's like how I started contextualizing the music.
Yeah. I really love that. That's so intentional and thoughtful, and I just can't wait till everyone gets to experience it. And we've all experienced a lot of changes over the past 18 months. So as a musician, what have some of the more challenges and changes been for you?
Right. So, I mean, as a musician, there's definitely community challenges, but
Yeah.
I don't think the challenges are really unique. For just, there's same challenges that everyone's kind of going through: the lack of community, lack of secure work, lack of mental stability, and all the things that are going on. But creatively, actually, I think being a piano player, I'm kind of lucky. I get to play with myself, at the piano as a full orchestra. Like some of my horn player friends can't necessarily do that. They're stuck with backing tracks when we're really in deep isolation. But, I think kind of forging like a new path to getting our creativity out to the public and connecting with the community and connecting with venues and things like that. That whole thing has been a change. But I think it's similar to a lot of businesses who've had to change their model. So musicians had to do that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as an artist, I can relate to that. Well, Chris, I think that we are ready to hear your debut performance. And this performance was recorded earlier at the Cabaret, which has been very supportive of artists in need of a space during the pandemic. They graciously partnered with Spirit in Place to provide a setting to film you. Is there anything you want to say more before we watch?
Not too much. I hope that this piece evokes a new thought or some kind of new inspiration or a new perspective. Hope that you take that away from the piece.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for offering this up, Chris.
Thank you.
Christopher, that was absolutely incredible. It was truly, truly moving. Thank you so very much. And I love that you call it the road, because you just really took us on this journey, and it just, there was just like movement and it swelled. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for your feedback. It means a lot. It means a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm sure everybody wants to know where we can hear you live and where we can find your music online, on social media. Can you tell us how to stay connected to you?
Sure, yeah. So my website is www.cppiano.com. You can also find me on Instagram, which I use probably most frequently, at Christopher Pi 2010 on Instagram, Christopher Pi 2010. And for gigs around town, every first Friday I host a after party with my trio, sometimes a quartet, and that's at McGowan Hall, like coming up on November 5th. And then every third Friday we'll be at the Soul Kitchen. Every fourth Friday we'll be at Point on Penn, like it used to be the old Elbow Room. But then you can check social media for other shows, and catch me at the Chatterbox, of course. And yeah, social media for like special events and other things like that. But those are the kind of steady ones if you want to catch something.
Oh, wonderful. Well, we have lots of options, so where we can find you. So thank you for offering those up, and it's great to have you here.
Thank you.
It is truly a gift to be able to celebrate this level of creativity and talent tonight. Spirit and Place is a space for artists to do their thing. It is also a space for scholars to get creative with their work. Franklin College, Purdue University, Ivy Tech, and Indiana University all have connections to this year's festival. But IUPUI scholars have shown up in force this year. 9 events in this year's festival have been created, not just featuring, but created by IUPUI faculty and students. Spirit and Place Program Director Erin Kelly sat down recently with Dr. Lasana Kasimbe, a poet and professor from the School of Education, Dr. Martin Coleman, a philosophy professor in the School of Liberal Arts, and PhD candidate in American Studies, Reverend Shonda Nicole Gladden, to talk about how their festival events celebrate the humanities.
Well, I want to thank everybody for joining me today. I'm so excited to meet with this group of scholars from IUPUI, because Spirit and Place has always been a place for universities and academic units to host events. But really this year during the application phase, it was quite amazing how many independent scholars proposed events, I think really in hopes of using the power of Spirit and Place to connect to audiences outside the campus. And then personally, as not only the program director, but as someone who has a background in the humanities, I'm an alum of the School of Liberal Arts at IUPUI, I was just really excited for the amazing humanities-based content that you're bringing into this year's festival. So Dr. Coleman, I want to start with you. Ask you a little bit about your event. You're a philosophy professor here in the School of Liberal Arts at IUPUI. The event that you've created is called The Moral of Our Stories. Now, as a philosophy professor, you're talking about ethics in the classroom all the time, but you're hoping to create a conversation in the community where you're engaging community leaders, nonprofit leaders, to talk about the ethical quandaries that they often face, particularly with their work in the social justice sphere. Why was it important for you to bring this kind of conversation into the festival?
Thanks, Erin. Thanks for that question. The enduring mainstream of philosophy has always been public, and in the European and American traditions, the obvious source for this mainstream is Socrates, philosophizing in the middle of the city and engaging all comers. And our Spirit and Place event grew out of another social condition for philosophy, namely friendship. And so in city parks, on bike rides, in book clubs, at parties and around campfires, this group has been talking to each other and talking to others about our experiences and challenges in working for affordable housing, environmental stewardship, youth development, education, and addressing the harms that women experience as a result of the prison industrial complex. And two constants running through these years-long conversations have been ideals or moral vision and the concrete next-door context of the living community. So these conversations have been philosophical all along. And with Spirit in Place, we would like to invite all comers to join in.
Reverend Gladden, okay, you're a reverend, you're a PhD candidate, you're an all-around busy human being, yet you have an event in this year's Spirit in Place Festival, and it is called Common Ground Cinematic Conversations, The Enduring Legacy of the Plantation. And you're offering up a mini film festival along with a panel conversation. Now, what I find interesting about your event, this year's theme is change, but your event really isn't about change, but rather the resistance to change. So what is it that films and plantation politics have to teach us about the resistance to change?
Well, Erin, thank you first so much to you and Spirit in Place for the opportunity to be part of this festival. You know, when I was thinking about the theme of change, I was reminded as a member of the first Greek-lettered organization for college-educated women of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, the ways that Black women get portrayed in film is interesting. And as I thought about the plantation as a site for considering that, I said, there are these films where Black women are focused on and how their embodiment is captured by the screen image as well as by the camera. The ways that Black women are looked at and talked about, it hasn't changed very much. And I have a hunch as an emerging scholar that it's because of the ways that the caricatures of anticipated and expected Black womanhood gets portrayed in films. And so what better way to look at it than plantation-themed films, because those plantation themes emerge as ways of performance that Black bodies are expected to contort into. When we think about the January 6th experience here in the United States, there are certain politics of racialized politics that get pulled apart in so many different ways that I have a hunch starts at the plantation and continues to be a stream of consciousness in so many of the ways that we engage one another.
Sounds so amazingly thought-provoking. Just so the audience knows, which films are you going to be featuring during the mini film festival?
You know, I don't want to tell them in this setting because I want them to go to the website. I want to make certain that they are visiting the website. And so there are several wonderful films, as you have just seen in the news if you've been watching. Sankofa has emerged as one of those films that is a plantation-themed film that Netflix has just picked back up. But go to the website, you'll be surprised, and then come out to the event for sure.
Thank you, that's wonderful. Dr. Kazimbi, thank you for joining us today. Now, you are a poet. You teach in the School of Education. Your event that you've created is called An Introduction to Black Humanity 101.
Yes.
It is very much rooted in the arts, but it has a really strong humanities backbone.
Yes.
And I was hoping you could tell us a bit about the event and how you're bridging the arts and humanities during this festival.
Oh, perfect question. And thank you very much for the invitation to join you in conversation. I'm excited about it because it's an interrogation that doesn't often happen. It's common knowledge, but it's not commonly accessed. So what we're trying to do in the presentation is actually a visual art exhibition and a scholarly lecture. And it's about the gaze among African people and in Africa by Europeans in the early classical period. Now, this information, we constantly enter history around the transatlantic slave trade era, circa Middle Ages, 1400s, but rarely have we gone, especially in larger public settings, back to the early classical period where the gaze toward African people and Blackness was 180 degrees different. So what I'm trying to do with this brief presentation or multi-day presentation is interrogate that gaze. Who are these European patriarchs and poets and religious archetypes who are actually producing material culture, art, vases, doorknobs, plates, statuary, etc., valorizing African people, valorizing Blackness, and really looking at Blackness, though it had a sort of a fetishization and an exotic appeal to it, but it was also qualitatively different than the gaze that took place around the advent of the European slave trade. And of course, now in the modern era, we try to connect that back.
Wonderful. I am just so appreciative of the scholarship and the passion that you are bringing to this year's festival, and how you are helping to connect the wider community to the value of the humanities and helping us make sense of the world. So thank you very much. I wish you the best of luck during this year's festival, and I hope we see you again in future festivals.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wow, how cool is all that? Art history, film, ethics, and those aren't the only scholarly events happening. Dr. Richard Gunnerman, a medical humanities professor, is giving on lecture called Changing Human Nature, which is about the history of eugenics. He's partnering with the Indiana Medical History Museum, which has a second event in the festival focused on trauma-informed care for the mentally ill called Changing Directions. Dr. Jeremy Price with the Digital Education Hub in the IU School of Education at IUPUI has created Coming Through the Other Side, which brings teachers and parents together to examine the impacts of COVID-19 in classrooms. In Climate Change and American Religion, the IUPUI Senior Academy in Religious Studies scholar, Peter Thusen, are tackling climate change and faith with their event. And there is more. Dig into your event guide or the Spirit and Place website to find the events that are perfect for you. I promise there is something for everyone, especially if you want to engage in meaningful dialogue and experience something outside your day-to-day routine. Hear from folks in Johnson County about that community's efforts in creating positive change in the community through equity, diversity, and inclusion. If you want to explore Indy, WFYI's Spirited Chase is an on-the-go mystery tour of the city. And Ivy Tech Indianapolis is hosting a family-friendly day this Saturday at the Circle City Industrial Complex called The Hole in Our Hearts. The Indiana Historical Society and Can Cinema's B Movies and Bad Histories is sure to be a good time, while psychedelic medicine, CPR for the soul, is a definite first for the festival. It's this kind of diversity of events is why I hope you love the Spirit and Place Festival so much, and it's also why I love it. I love the festival because it amplifies a diversity of voices that traditionally have gone unheard. You've already heard about the Memory Keepers, but there is also Uncomfortable Conversations, telling our stories, transforming our world, which features young spoken word artists, writers, and others from Word and Bond Inc. and Ivy Tech sharing their stories. The event, Pass the Klan, The Roots of Racism and IPS and Beyond, puts your voice front and center by inviting attendees to examine primary source materials in an effort to construct a historical narrative guided by the community's questions. You can even learn how to use your voice for action by attending the Indianapolis Peace and Justice Center's We Are the Change We've Been Waiting For, a practical guide to social change. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been wonderful to celebrate the kickoff of the 26th Annual Spirit and Place Festival. I hope this preview of events has encouraged you to register for an event, or 2, or 3, or 4. Remember that all events are subject to change, so please visit spiritandplace.org for event updates and watch your inbox for confirmation messages from the event organizers. And please remember to adhere to COVID-19 safety policies at all events, and when in doubt, stay home if you're feeling unwell. Many events have online options, so take advantage of the technology to keep yourself and others safe. Well, it has been such a pleasure being your MC tonight. I wish you all wellness. please go and enjoy the festival. Thank you and good night.